Hello everybody, my name is Zach with Overrated Gamers, and today we're going to be doing an EDH deck tech on Captain Sisay. Sisay is 2, a green and a white. With tap, search your library for a legendary card, reveal it, and put it in your hand. Sisay's strengths lie in her ability to quickly tutor up answers to your opponent's cards and lock down the board, and her overall consistency. To start with, we're going to go over the land base. We run 8 plains, 8 forests. We run 3 fetch lands. I did have a hard time finding more spots. I could probably pull out 2 more basics eventually, but fetch lands are kind of the icing on the cake. They help add some consistency to the deck. I run 2 green ones and a white one. Or I run Strand, Wooded Foothills, and Windswept Heath. Windswept Heath gets the white or the green. After that, we have our fairly standard lands. Ancient 2, produces 2, deals 2. This one might seem a little strange, but I run a Brushland in here. It taps for a colorless or for a green or a white, but deals 1 damage to you. One of the important things for Captain Sisay is to have lands that don't enter the battlefield tapped. Lands that come in tapped slow you down, as you generally want to play Sisay on turn 2 by latest turn 3. If you start playing her around turn 4 or later, generally your opponents have answers to her, or your opponents are going to have enough of a board state where cards like Gaddock Teeg and Kataki are going to be really easy to answer. We have Temple Garden. We have Command Tower. This one happens to be in Japanese. We have Savannah, just a strictly superior Temple Garden for those of you newer to Magic. Pendelhaven, this might seem like a strange land, but it basically functions as a forest that Sisay can tutor out. The fact that it can give a 1/1 creature +1/+2 is something I rarely ever use. It's mostly just a legendary forest. Next card is Okina, Temple to the Grandfathers. Same thing as Pendelhaven, gives me a land to tutor for if I need more land. So you pay 1 green, give a legendary +1/+1. That's been relevant once or twice in the 5 years that I've had this deck. The next card is Eiganjo Castle. Basically functions as a plains that I can tutor up. Its ability for 1 white and tap to prevent 2 damage to a legendary creature has been occasionally relevant. Occasionally it's allowed me to block with Sisay and then keep her from dying. Stuff like that. Next up we have Dryad Arbor, land creature. You can green Sun Zenith for it on turn 1 to get an additional land out. You can discard it to Survival of the Fittest. It allows Gaea's Cradle to tap for another 1. You can also Birthing Pod it to start a Birthing Pod chain. It's a very useful card to have, very versatile. It's one of the few lands I have in here that can't tap for mana the turn it comes out, but I feel like the downsides are worth it. Gemstone Caverns, on top of being a legendary land I can search for, if it's in my opening hand and I am not playing first, I can begin the game with it and play with a luck counter on it. It taps to add colorless to your mana pool, but if you started it with the luck counter on it, it can produce any color. It's a very strong land. You do have to exile a card from your hand to get that luck counter, but it's pretty worth it in a deck like Captain Sisay, taking a little hand disadvantage to get her out a turn sooner. Next up we have Horizon Canopy. You have to pay 1 life to add green or white to your mana pool with it, but you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to draw a card. It's nice because it filters through your deck. We don't run that many draw spells. It's mostly just tutors to get what we need, but being able to filter through a little bit when you have a lot of lands, being able to bring it back with the Sun Titan. It's a fairly strong land. Paying 1 life every turn doesn't mean that much when you're at 40 life. Next we have Strip Mine. You tap for a colorless, or you can sacrifice it to destroy target land. Strip Mine is very useful in this deck in that it can strip out your opponent's Ancient Tomb or any card thing like a Gaea's Cradle. if you're trying to attack them and they have Maze of Ith. It also just knocks them out of a land drop for the turn. This deck runs cards like Crucible of Worlds. You drop that with Azusa, and you can start strip mining multiple lands fairly early in the game. The main resource now in this deck is land destruction. Homeward Path. With a deck, once people have become familiar with Captain Sisay, people do try to bribery creatures out of your deck, or they try to treachery them or Gilded Drake them. Homeward Path allows you to regain control of your creatures. So it's a pretty nice card to have in there. You can crop rotation into it after someone has attempted to briberied you, or played a Gilded Drake or anything like that. We have High Market. It allows you to sacrifice a creature to gain a life, and it makes colorless mana. This card's pretty good if for evasion. If someone tries to Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares the card in here. Rather than letting it be completely gone forever, you can let it hit the grave, and if it's legendary, Loyal Retainers can bring it back. If it's a low CMC like Gaddock Teeg or Kataki, you can bring it back to your Sun Titan later. We run Genesis, so you pay 3 to return a creature from your grave to your hand. It's a very useful card. Once again, it can also keep a creature from being treacheried. It's a fairly nice card to have in the deck. We have Yavimaya Hollow. Now this land is also legendary. It produces colorless, but you can also pay green and tap it to regenerate one of your creatures. Oftentimes people will have board wipes, and so it's nice to be able to bring your creatures back. We have Kor Haven. It taps for a colorless. This one has saved me from dying multiple times to commander damage. It's 1 and a white, tap to prevent all combat damage that will be dealt by target attacking creature this turn. You can also use it for combat tricks. This singing with a creature that's about the same size as one of yours. You can block, kill their creature, and your creature will live. Usually it's used to keep a big, really large creature from killing you, though. Flagstones of Trokair. This is actually one of my favorite lands in the deck. It's a legendary land that adds white, and when it's put into a graveyard, you can search for a plains and put it into play. It serves a few additional purposes. If I Armageddon, it gets me a land out. I can also crop rotation it to get a little ahead on land drops. It is worth noting it does get Savannah and Temple Garden, because it just cares that it's the super type, or that it's the land type plains. It doesn't care that it's basic. And of course we have Gaea's Cradle, legendary land. Make a tap, add a green to your mana pool for each creature you control. Very useful for the deck. You can crop rotation into it. Captain Sisay can tutor for it. Generally this card is producing at least 3 mana. Usually if I'm tutoring for it, at that point it's producing around 5. It sets you way ahead of the game. It provides you with enough mana when you have Kamal out to usually eat a bunch of lands with Elesh Norn. Very powerful, very nice card. We have Mana Crypt, 0 mana. It taps and gives you 2 colorless mana, but at the beginning of your upkeep you have to flip a coin. If you call it wrong, it deals 3 damage to you. Once again, in a game like EDH, that's not too big of a deal, especially in a deck that tries to finish the game very quickly. Usually Sisay tries to end the game around turns 8 to 10. So we run a lot of cards like this that will up the mana, get up the captain, and immediately start tutoring. Mox Diamond, when it comes into play, you have to discard a land from your hand or sacrifice it. It is a 0-drop though, and it taps to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Once again, yes, it's a little bit of hand disadvantage, but as I said, being able to get Sisay out on turn 2, at the latest turn 3, is very important for the deck. One more hand disadvantage card, and this is the last one, which is Crow Mox. When it comes into play, you can exile a non-artifact, non-land card from your hand, and it can tap for any of those colors that you exiled on it. Also a 0-drop. We have Soul Ring. Mana Vault, I tend to only use this card once for mana. Afterwards, I usually just leave it tapped and take the damage. 1 mana, taps for 3, doesn't untap unless you pay 4 at your upkeep. If you don't pay the 4, it deals 1 damage to you. After that, we have Birds of Paradise. It can tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. It's got flying, so it can block other flyers. It's a 0/1. It's a decent card. After that, we have Burgeoning and Exploration. Both of these cards you usually want to keep about at least 3 lands in your opener if you're actually playing them. Burgeoning, whenever an opponent plays a land, you can put a land from your hand into play. Allows you to get up to 3 or 4 turns ahead of someone. Very easily allows you to get a turn 2 Captain Sisay, as I run 37 lands in the deck. Then we have Exploration, which lets you play 1 additional land each turn. It's good in the early game. It can be good later in the game if you have Crucible of Worlds and Strip Mine out, allowing you to strip mine a bunch of people fairly quickly. Talisman of Unity. It taps and makes colorless, or it can make a green and a white to deal 1 damage to you. Yes, a lot of my mana sources do damage to me. But as I've said, sometimes you have to sacrifice something to get a little speed, and the thing we sacrifice in this game is life. Sakura-Tribe Elder, it's rampant growth on a 1/1 creature. Nature's Lore, search your library for a forest and put it into play. Now it does come into play untapped. This card can also get, it can get Savannah and Temple Garden. It can also get Dryad Arbor. For some reason you want Dryad Arbor on the field. Maybe you have a Gaea's Cradle out and you want it to start tapping for more, or maybe you need to sack it to Birthing Pod. We have Kodama's Reach and Cultivate. They are functionally the same card. You pay 3, search your library for 2 basic lands, put 1 into your hand and 1 into play tapped. And finally we have Harrow. Harrow is an instant and 3 mana. You have to sacrifice a land when you play it, and you search for 2 basic land cards and put them into play. This one does bring them into play untapped, which is pretty nice. After that you could play something like Sakura-Tribe Elder or Nature's Lore, or even just play a Gaddock Teeg after casting it. After that we have our removal section. We have about 4 cards in here for targeted removal. We have Path to Exile. Exile a creature, its controller gets a basic land into play tapped. Swords to Plowshares, exile a creature, gain life, its controller gains life equal to its power. Fairly standard removals. We have Beast Within. I wanted to have as much coverage as possible in here, and sometimes you need to kill something like a land, a planeswalker, and just allows you to kill any permanent. Its controller gets a 3/3 beast. It's a very strong green removal spell, and it removes anything on the board that's causing you an issue. After that we have Croson Grip, split second as long as it's on the stack. Players can't cast spells or activate abilities except mana abilities, and this destroys an artifact or an enchantment. It keeps a lot of the combo decks from going off. Some of those decks can get off a little bit before Captain Sisay's able to lock the board down, so this gives you an answer to that. It also allows you to kill your opponent's mana rocks early in the game if they're starting to get ahead of you. Next up we have Crop Rotation. Lets you, it's 1 green, instant. When you play it, sacrifice a land, search for a land card, put it into play, then shuffle your library. Lets you get High Market, Homeward Path in response to them trying to either take your creatures or taking them. Also allows you to get things like Gaea's Cradle or Ancient Tomb out. Enlightened Tutor lets you search for an artifact or enchantment, put it on top of your library after revealing it to everyone. Instant speed, you can use it to, on the first turn, to get like a Soul Ring on top of the deck, or to get a Mana Crypt on top. In the late game it also allows you to get Privileged Position, Aura Shards, cards like that. We have Worldly Tutor. It does the same thing as Enlightened Tutor, except it searches for creatures and it costs 1 green. Green Sun Zenith, 1 green and X, search for a green creature with CMC X or less, and put it into play. Then you shuffle your Green Sun back in. So it does get multiple uses. You can turn 1, use it to get a Dryad Arbor out, basically allowing for an extra land on turn 1. You can also use it to get things like Bird of Paradise if you want to start a birthing pod chain. You can get Gaddock Teeg out with it. You can get Kamal, Genesis. You can get Fauna Shaman out with it. Overall, it's a pretty nice card. Survival of the Fittest, 1 in a green, pay a green, discard a creature, search for a creature. This card has a couple of uses, one of them being to get Genesis into your graveyard. The other one is just to search creatures up. But if you have the spare mana, you can discard a creature, get Genesis, discard Genesis, start bringing back creatures that may have been killed earlier on in the game. Or you can use it to discard Genesis and get Captain Sisay back from the graveyard, since if it gets to the later game, Captain Sisay does die a lot. We have Time of Need. Search your library for legendary creature, reveal it, put it into your hand for 1 in a green. Basically, it's just tapping Sisay. It's basically another Sisay ability. This deck does have a rather high number of tutors because it does really like consistency. Elodomri's Call tutors for any creature in your deck for white and a green. It's an instant, which is pretty nice because you can leave mana open if for a potential path to Exile Swords to Plowshares the end of the turn. You can Elodomri's Call the creature right to your hand. You can also cast this during your turn if you need a creature right away. Not all the tutors actually put it in your hand. We have Sterling Grove. This card is both a tutor and a utility card. It gives your other enchantments Shroud. If it's out while Privileged Position is out, none of your permanents can be targeted by your opponents. You can also sacrifice Sterling Grove to search for an enchantment, reveal it, and put it on top of your library. So you can fetch Privileged Position or Shards. If it's later in the game, sometimes you can search for Mirari's Wake to double your mana. After that, we have Birthing Pod, 3 in a Phyrexian, which you pay with either green or 2 life. 1 in a Phyrexian, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature with converted mana cost equal to that creature's +1. So you sacrifice a 1-drop and you get a 2-drop. You can only do this at sorcery speed, but it is very nice. You can sacrifice Sisay, get Genesis, sacrifice Genesis, get Crovax, sacrifice Crovax, get Norn, or any kind of way that you want to sacrifice up. The deck does go from creature converted mana cost 1 all the way up to 11. Next up we have our legendary creatures. First one is Kataki War's Wage, 1 in a white. All artifacts have at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this artifact unless you pay 1. Now yes, our deck does also run a lot of artifacts for ramp. Generally by the time we're playing this out, we've already gotten Captain Sisay out, and having to keep them tapped or sacrifice them usually doesn't matter too much because we can start tutoring out lands, cards like Azusa to allow extra land drops, and usually start ramping ahead, even with our rocks being either unusable or only getting minimal use out of them. Meanwhile, this does tend to hurt your opponents a bit more in the early game, especially for the artifact-heavy decks. Saffi Eriksdotter, 1 in a green, sacrifice her. When a creature is put into your graveyard this turn, return that card to play. This does also work if your creatures are sacrificed. It's one of the few cards in here that help you to get around that. She's generally not a card you tutor for too often unless you're fairly certain your Captain Sisay is going to be killed on the next turn. Usually this is just a card that I'm happy to draw, but occasionally you're going to want to tutor for it. Gaddock Teeg, green and a white for a 2/2. One of the most hated cards in Commander. Non-creature spells with converted mana cost 4 or greater can't be played. Non-creature spells with X and the mana cost can't be played. Now this deck does only run a few non-creature spells with X or with converted mana cost 4 or greater. That's one of the reasons why I don't have a Faith's Reward in here, because while Faith's Reward bringing all my permanents back is nice, it's not necessary, and I'd rather have a Gaddock Teeg. Rakai, the History of Kamigawa, one of our few cards that draws us cards. Whenever you play a legendary spell, draw a card. Play was eroded to cast, so even if it's countered, you still get to draw the card. Azusa, Lost but Seeking. She allows you to play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. In a deck with 37 lands, that is very useful. It also allows for an Azusa Strip Mine lock if you have Crucible of Worlds out. Thalia, Heretic Cathar, one of the other early cards that we tutor for. It's a 3 mana 3/2. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. In Commander, a lot of players do run multicolor decks, and so they have a decent amount of non-basic cards. Especially the players who like to run fetch lands, those come into play tapped, so they have to wait a turn to even crack them. Also hits creatures, so if they're running a Kiki combo, they don't immediately kill you. Also just stops hasty creatures for a turn in general. Linvala, Keeper of Silence. Abilities of creatures your opponents control can't be activated. Hits cards like Arkham Daxon, other Sisay decks, Brea. Just anything with an activated ability on it can't be used. Hits all people's mana dorks, all that good stuff. We have Sigarda. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. She also has flying and hexproof. Very nice for if you're playing against any of the mono black decks out there. It stops Grave Pact, Dictate of Erebos, Butcher of Malakir. Also stops All Is Dust. If they have the Eldrazi Titans that are swinging at you, it keeps them from making you sacrifice permanents as well. And she has hexproof, so she can't be targeted by Swords to Plowshares Pact, Exile, Slaughter Pact, or anything along those lines. Next we have Kamal. He's part of our land destruction package. He is 4 and 2 green. He has Pay a Green. Target land becomes a 1/1 creature until end of turn. And 2 and 3 green. Creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. So in the late game you can use him to overrun your opponents and win the game once you have a lot of mana. But his main use is to combine this ability with either Crovax, who gives non-white creatures -1/-1 and white creatures +1/+1. When Kamal does turn land into a creature, it is colorless. Crovax also has pay 2 life, return it to its owner's hand. And of course the more powerful version of Crovax, Elesh Norn. 7 mana, your creatures get +2/+2. Your other creatures get +2/+2. Your opponent's creatures get -2/-2. Generally your opponent, you do want to play Elesh Norn first, and generally your opponents will try to kill your Elesh Norn. After they've killed your Elesh Norn, you just get your Crovax Ascendant hero, and you proceed to use your Kamal Crovax to kill all of their lands if they removed your Elesh Norn. After that we have Myojin, a Cleansing Fire. He's 8 mana, comes into play with a Divinity counter. He's indestructible while he has his Divinity counter, and you can remove the Divinity counter to destroy each other creature. It is worth noting that if you brought him into play with Loyal Retainers, if you brought him into play with Karmic Guide, if you Birthing Potted him into play, he will not have the Divinity counter, and he is basically useless. You do want to play him from your hand. He's only in here to board wipe, as a board wipe that you can search up. Avacyn, Angel of Hope, 8 mana 8/8, Flying Vigilance. She and your other permanents are indestructible. It's very useful against opposing board wipes if you are late in the game and you're able to play her into Myojin. She allows your Armageddon to be fairly one-sided, hitting just your opponents. She's a very strong card, protects your board. Vorinclex, he is actually one of the weaker legendaries in the deck, along with the Myojin. He's 8 mana 7/6. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type it produced, and whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, it does not tap during its controller's next untap step. It's a fairly annoying card. I find the mana doubling is generally not worth it. Usually once I'm at 8 mana, I'm usually attempting to end the game by then. And when he does come out, opponents generally spend 1 or 2 mana removing him, and they're only down 2 lands for that turn. so he may eventually see a cut from the deck. Next up we have Iona, 9 mana. When she comes into play, choose a color. Opponents can't cast spells of that color. It's really useful in 4-player games. If you have a feeling that someone's going to Cyclonic Rift, you can name their blue, keep all your other creatures out. Generally when she's come out, you have other control cards on the board, so she's just a little bit of icing on the cake. You can name black to stop the Toxic Deluge. After that, we have one of our 2 finishing creatures. We have Kozilek, 10 mana, 12/12, on cast, draw 4 cards. When he attacks, opponent sacks 4 permanents, and when he's put into a graveyard, you shuffle your graveyard into your library. So you can discard him to survival. You can high market him if for some reason you wanted to shuffle everything back in. But generally, he's just a really big beater that ends the game fairly quickly. And then we have Ulamog, second Eldrazi Titan. On cast, he destroys the permanent. Ulamog is indestructible, and his other 2 effects are the same as Kozilek, but he is a 10/10. Very useful on cast. Even if he's countered, he does kill something. Even if he is countered, he shuffles back in, and Sisay can tutor for him on the following turn. And you're guaranteed to be able to eat another permanent on the next cast. After that, we move on to our non-legendary creatures. Our first one was Weathered Wayfarer. He's 1 white. You can pay a white and tap him, search for a land, reveal it, put it into your hand. He's useful if you're not going first. You can turn 1, play him out, and start getting things like Ancient Tomb and Gaia's Cradle. So you're producing more mana than your opponents, even though you may have less lands. We have Fauna Shaman, 1 in a green, pay a green and tap her, discard a creature, search for a creature. She serves as another survival of the fittest. Just a little more consistency for the deck. We have Qasali Pridemage. This one seems a little bit weird. He's 1 in a green, and he has 1, sacrifice him, destroy an artifact or enchantment. His main use in the deck is I have a lot of creature tutors, so I can tutor him up if there's a problematic enchantment or artifact on the board. Or if I think that one of my opponents is starting to get a bit too far ahead of me, I can destroy some of their artifact ramp. After that, we have Aven Mindcensor, 3 mana, 2/1 with flash, flying, and if an opponent would search their library, they search their top 4 cards instead. You can use it in response to a demonic tutor, vampiric tutor, even to fetch lands. It hits a lot of those decks that really need to search through their library. We have Eternal Witness, 1 and 2 green. It's one of those cards you see in almost every green EDH deck. When it enters the battlefield, return a card from your graveyard to your hand. As I've said, we can get any one of, we can get like Elesh, Norn, Kamal. Occasionally I'll let Sisay hit the grave, so I can just bring it back with Eternal Witness if she's died a few times. Loyal Retainers, 2 and a white. You can sacrifice them to return a legendary card, for a legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It's got a weird text, but you can only do it during your turn before attackers are declared. It's not extremely relevant. You only start attacking towards the end of the game anyways, but usually you get it to get back things like Gaddock Teeg, your Elesh, Norn, your Kamal, sometimes Iona, just something to control the board a bit more. It's not usually a card that people are expecting to see, so for 3 mana to reanimate a creature, it's pretty strong. After that, we have Karmic Guide. This one's a bit written on. One of my friends drew on it because it was partially destroyed. And anyway, Karmic Guide is a 5-drop, flying, protection from black. When it comes into play, you can choose a creature from your graveyard and reanimate it. During your upkeep, you do have to pay 5 the turn after she came in or she dies. You almost always just let her die. You can usually just get her back later. Next up we have Genesis. He's a 5 mana 4/4. Beginning of your upkeep, if he's in your graveyard, you can pay 3. If you do, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. This deck is very resilient. It has a lot of ways to get things back from its graveyard. It's one of Sisay's many strengths. They'll spend the time killing a bunch of your cards off, and you just keep bringing them back. It's not something that's usually expected of a green-white deck either. We have Sun Titan, 6 mana, 6/6 Vigilance. When it comes into play or attacks, you can return a permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. You can use it to get Loyal Retainers, and on your following turn, you can bring back things like Gaddock Teeg, or you can use it to get things back like Gaddock Teeg. You can get back your big legendaries with the Loyal Retainers from the Sun Titan. You can also just get back small things, Azusa, your Gaea's Cradle. You can use it to get back your Eternal Witness to return anything else from your graveyard to your hand. You can also Karmic Guide the Sun Titan, and then have the Sun Titan bring back another card. Just fun little things like that. We have Land Tax, 1 white enchantment. During your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you can search your library for up to 3 basic lands, reveal them and put them in your hand. I did used to have a scroll rack in here, but it had to come out to make more room. At the same time, this card is also very good if you have Exploration or Burgeoning in your opening hand, and you're not going first. You can turn 1 Land Tax, you can turn 2 a Burgeoning and get really far ahead on lands, or even turn 2 an Exploration and get really far ahead on lands. Generally, you only need your Land Tax to activate once or twice. After that, you're just discarding excess lands, so you can start drawing more consistent threats and things to control the board. We have Sylvan Library, our last card that draws us cards. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can draw 2 extra cards from your deck. If you do, put up to 2 of the cards you drew this turn back on top. Pay for life for each one that you didn't. At the very worst, this card functions as a Sensei's Divining Top before you draw. Oftentimes, paying the 8 life can be worth it if you're really trying to get ahead, or if you just need to get some of those cards off your deck. This is where some of those fetch lands can be pretty useful, because you can use them to shuffle away cards you don't want. We have Lightning Greaves, gives a creature haste, and Shroud allows you to activate Captain Sisay the turn she comes out, or allows you to protect cards like your Elesh, Norn, or Kamal from removal. We have Crucible of Werewolves. You can play land cards from your graveyard as though they were in your hand. Very strong after you've Armageddoned, or before you play Armageddon to have this out. If you have an Azusa, an Exploration, you can start playing extra strip mines from your graveyard and start strip mining the board. It's one of the main reasons it's in here. Aura Shards. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can destroy an artifact or enchantment. Start hitting your opponent's permanents as you start locking the board down. It's a pretty nice card to have in there. I like it. 1000-Year Elixir, 3 mana. You may play activated abilities of creatures you control as though they had haste, meaning you can tap Captain Sisay the turn she comes out. You cannot attack with her, though, the turn she comes out. You can pay 1 and tap it to also untap a creature. It gives you 2 Sisay abilities every turn. Yes, this does say Happy 20th Birthday, George. That is just how I got it. But it is an Armageddon, destroys all lands. You can do this as early as turn 3 on occasion. Use your judgment for that, though. But if you think you can keep your opponents from coming back, and if you think you can come back from it, then I have Armageddon occasionally as early as turn 3 and taking the game over from there. After that, we have Mirari's Wake, 5 mana. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type it produced. Very nice for the land tapping. The +1 to your creatures is not very relevant. It's mostly just in here as a mana doubler. As I said, the deck doesn't start attacking until towards the end of the game anyways. And our final card is Privileged Position, 2 in hybrid white-green. Hybrid white-green, hybrid white-green. Other permanents you control have hexproof. This card basically, it's not something I tutor for, but it is something that if I draw, it's pretty useful in keeping your opponents from hitting your Captain Sisay, your Norn, Not most decks don't run that many complete board wipes, and Gaddock Teeg does keep those board wipes from happening for the most part. And that was our list for Captain Sisay. She is very strong. A few of her weaknesses are that if they kill your commander a couple of times, it can be a bit hard to get off, which is why we have the other tutors in the deck, so that it can function without the commander if need be. At the end of this video, I will have a description. In the description, I will have a list of the deck. Thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you in the next video.